All right, everyone, thank you for joining our afternoon session. I'm going to introduce our esteemed documentarian panelists, starting from my immediate left and then moving down the line. We have Elegance Bratton, the director of, most recently, Move Your Body, The Birth of House.
Nice.
We have R.J. Cutler, director of, most recently, Martha and Elton John, Never Too Late. We got Bao Nguyen, the director of, most recently, The Greatest Night in Pop and The Stringer. Woohoo! Dan Krauss, director of Bodyguard of Lies. Woohoo! Mary Robertson, director of The Fall of Diddy. Yay! And Jennifer Tiexiera, director of Speak and Rebecca, among others. Yay! So I'm just going to launch right in. I think a common theme among all of your work, and something that is kind of essential to truth-seeking, as we might put it, is getting people to speak in ways they otherwise might not. And I'm going to start by asking Bao, and I'd like everyone to jump in as they see fit, but your two projects, especially in the past year, The Stringer and The Greatest Night in Pop, couldn't be more different, but for the fact that they share people speaking really candidly, in one case about the authorship of a famous photograph of a girl being napalmed in the Vietnam War. In another case, the star-studded recording of We Are the World. But in both cases, you got people to really open up. Is there a secret to getting folks to open up? And you can start, and then everyone can jump in.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be in such an esteemed company today. And it's interesting. I try to find a connection between all my work in that, as you said, Greatest Night in Pop is about a very famous, iconic song, and then The Stringer is about an iconic photograph. And to answer your question, I think for me, as a filmmaker, I'm in the practice of listening. And you know, for me, if a film sort of asks or leaves more questions than answers, I think that's one of the things I want audiences to take away from. Like, I'm not there to present like something definitive. I'm there to present an honest depiction. Even the word truth to me is kind of hard to grasp with, because truth can mean something to so many different people. But you know, you can always there's an honesty in the storytelling in someone's perspective and how they present themselves. So for me, I think that's how I try to approach these subjects in many ways.
For me, I think the way I gain access, my film Move Your Body, The Birth of House, is about the birth of house music, and really out of the shadow of disco demolition, which my film views as a site of racial trauma. So with that, it's fraught with a lot of complex feelings. You know, white folks in Chicago who don't see themselves as the bad guy, black folks who see themselves as only the victim, and like you said, the truth is much more complicated than that. So for me, it's about treating the person on screen as a participant. I don't even refer to the people in my films as subjects. I view them as an essential part of what I'm doing. So that way I try to kind of lessen the hierarchical feeling of me being the director and them being some sort of objectified thing, and treat them as the expert in their own experience. And I show up all the time, whenever, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. Months later, years later, I'm available. And I think just that kind of openness is what leads people to say things that they wouldn't normally say.
I think a magic of it is in the casting is maybe the wrong word, but in the finding of participants, in finding people who have interesting stories to tell, have the capacity to convey them interestingly, and who are willing to take part in the process. And I wanted to ask Jennifer first about this, because we were speaking before this panel began. Your film, Speak, follows 6 high schoolers competing with the ultimate goal of taking part in a national speech competition. And you follow them over months. And these are charismatic, interesting, different from one another, really special kids. And again, I'd like to open it up to the group about finding participants. But I was curious if you could just talk generally about how you find participants for projects.
Yeah, it's a process, right? And all these processes, whether it's, you know, mental health or ethics, or they take time and they take money. I think that thinking about that when we're in development and putting that in a line item and being really honest about it. With Speak, that process took 6 months. We cast from about 400 kids, and it wasn't like we were just casting the kids with the best stories. We were casting their families, we were casting their schools, their school districts. We were making sure that we were building a really safe environment, not just for us, but for them. And that's where really true storytelling flourishes. And it's not the story we're telling, it's the story, like Essence was saying, that we're telling together, that deep partnership, that deep collaboration. So yeah, it was a very long, tedious process, but being transparent along the way, and also making sure that like we're also dealing with kids, and rejection's really hard at that age. So making sure that we had people to be like, okay, this is where we are in the process, this is, but just keeping those lines of communication open so, we don't destroy. And
of course.
Yeah, because that was really important as well.
It's interesting. I'd like to hear from Dan and Mary, because both of your projects in this past year, in Bodyguard of Lies, you get people to open up about the kind of fog of war, the march to war in Iraq, and the grievous harm done, and the ways in which it was unnecessary. And these are disclosures that in some cases they've never really talked about. And Mary, in The Fall of Diddy, you're talking to people about the most sensitive things that's ever happened to them, perhaps, which is surviving assault at the hands of a very powerful figure. These people are speaking truth to power in a very literal sense, and speaking their truth. And both of you, maybe Mary first, and then Dan, if you could talk about building that comfort level, because you don't just call someone, it's not like being a newspaper beat reporter, you call someone on the phone and say, okay, spill. You had to kind of build to that, I imagine, over months.
Thanks, Dan. That's exactly right. In addition to executive producing The Fall of Diddy, I run a company called Maxine Productions. And at Maxine, we've created a number of documentaries, including Quiet on Set for our partners at ID, Fall of Diddy for our partners at ID, and much more. And across all of our productions, not just The Fall of Diddy, we work with talented directors, we work with the talented producers, and we're all motivated by a desire to adopt a trauma-sensitive approach. And I think there's been a lot written recently. There's a lot of deep thinking going on in documentary about what that really means. For us, it means that we're creating a collaborative environment. This does not mean ceding editorial control, which I think would cross a journalistic boundary. But it does mean, certainly when it comes to the case of those who have allegedly survived sexual abuse or assault, that we're not pushing them past their comfort zone. And there's an instance in The Fall of Diddy where one of our participants very clearly did not want to describe the details of the assault that she alleged transpired, and we certainly did not push her. We did not need those graphic details. I think the audience understood perfectly well the depth of her experience through what she was conveying on her face, and simply by her saying, I don't want to talk about that. I don't think there was ambiguity or uncertainty, and I'd like to think that the audience in those moments comes to trust in the hand of the author, comes to say, this is an author who's not exploiting the person who's being so brave in this very moment.
Obviously, the stakes are somewhat different in Bodyguard of Lies, but I'm curious, Dan, about building those relationships in your own manner.
Yeah, I guess I'm always amazed when people agree to be interviewed, to be part of a documentary. So I feel a great weight and responsibility. I want to be a good custodian of their story. And that's part of what I try to establish off the bat with them, is that I feel that weight, and I'm nervous about it. I'm holding it in my hands. It's precious. It's breakable. And I want them to know that that's something that weighs on me. So it's sharing in that vulnerability. I really like what Elegance and a couple other folks have mentioned about giving your subjects greater agency than you might in a journalistic context. But I also, I think that when people do agree to say yes to sit in front of your camera, there's always a reason. There's always something that they want to say. And so it's a bit of like playing the psychological chess match in a generous and compassionate way, but you're trying to kind of poke around the edges of that thing and investigate why they agreed to sit in front of you. It's often not what you think it is. And so my question, my sheet of questions generally, I dispense with them pretty early in the process, and I'm trying to locate that thing that's behind the wall that they want to say, that they're afraid to talk about, but is probably foundationally the reason that they said yes to me. And so it's really feeling around the edges of that and feeling for the soft.
RJ, this brings you to mind because among all of you have had this experience of trying to break down the wall, but your two most recent projects in the past 12 months or so, Martha and Elton John Never Too Late, are with very high-profile people. Frankly, when I heard that Martha Stewart was taking part in a documentary that she was not directing herself, and that I understand she did not have final cut, it takes nothing away from her. Perhaps I mean it as a compliment that she is a strong author of her own image. And I'm curious what it's like with participants who are accustomed to having control over their image and getting them to cede back a little bit of control so that you can tell their story in your way.
First I want to echo Bao's gratitude to you all for having us and inviting me to be among these great filmmakers. I think everybody here is talking about two fundamental things that go to the heart of our work. One is that it is extremely human to want your story told. We all know, though we live in denial of it, that we're here for a moment, and we have stories to tell, and tapping into that is really fundamental to how we work, hand in hand with the fact that our greatest asset is trust, and the earning of trust is what makes these films possible, and we could spend an entire panel talking about how one does that, but it really boils down to being trustworthy, and being who you say you're going to be, and everybody has given examples of what that means already in this conversation. So that informs the work that I do, whether the person is famous and in control and used to being in control, or not famous and often in control and used to being in control. It doesn't matter. The fame doesn't matter. But with people like, Martha and Elton and Anna Wintour and Dick Cheney, one needs to be very empathetic. What could be harder than Martha Stewart watching a movie that somebody else made about her life, right? I mean, it's
the ultimate challenge.
Yes, and for her, the ultimate challenge. So understanding that, and that goes into creating greater agency. She did not have final cut, but she had she had somebody, I want to say an open ear, but it was more like this than
a cowering ear.
But there was to understand the position that this person is in. Nobody who you make a movie about would make the same movie that you're making. They would all tell their story. You would tell, if I made a movie about you, you would make a different movie than I made. So one needs to understand that going in and take it from there, and that's where this conversation leads.
How do you all prepare your subjects for what it's going to be like? Because I will say I've been interviewed for a documentary before, and what I envisioned in my mind, what it was going to be like, when you're sitting in front of the camera, it's just different. It's not bad. It's just different. And so what kind of things do you tell, whether they're high profile or low profile? What kind of advice do you give people?
Well, with my most recent film, it centers around the guy who recorded the first House song, Vince Lawrence, and he's basically been forgotten by history until the film. So there's a lot of complicated feelings that he has about, like you said, we are only here for a limited amount of time, and as artists, it's our intention to leave our mark in the world. So imagine you leave this indelible mark, and then nobody knows. And you have to walk around in the world knowing, I'm the guy who started House, but no one else knows that. So with him, I find myself speaking to him at all stages of it. When we were going into production, it was just kind of giving him like a layout of like, what is an interview and what type of questions could I ask and what was okay for him to not answer. Like he wanted to please me so badly, but I had to make sure he understood that he's still very much in the driver's seat, and I'm not going to push him to a place that he's not comfortable, but I also want us to arrive to a place where we have breakthrough and transformation. And then gratefully the film got into Sundance. So once you hear you're in Sundance, you're like, okay, now I'm going to be famous. I'm going to go, and Rolling Stone's going to do interviews, and Martha Stewart's going to invite me to her show, you know? And I had to let him know, I'm like, this is a documentary at Sundance, and we don't have distribution yet, and, you know, it's going to feel, I let him know it's going to feel like the heat of 1,000 suns is on you when you're on that mountain, and then the next Monday it's going to be over. And I had to, you know, I had to be there for him in that process too. So I just try to be as forthright as possible.
Yeah, kind of building off that, I like to assume that they don't know anything because it's such a learning process. But in addition to that, I have to assume that I can't do it all alone, and none of us really can. And so I've really leaned into this community that we have in the doc world. Whether that's in something like Mary's case, when I was doing Unveiled, we did trauma training with the Dart Center. We worked with Pieces Loud. We, for the crew and the team, we worked with DOG, and we very closely with DOG through that process, and our company does as well. But we have this really beautiful infrastructure to make sure that, like, we're not social workers, we're not therapists, we're filmmakers. And I think it's really important that when we're having those conversations of transparency, that's not only put on you, Elegance, right? And to make sure that we have those people around us at Sundance and making sure that our blind spots are covered as much as possible along the way, and especially when we're dealing with victims of trauma or survivors. It's extremely important.
I think, just to kind of speak about what Elegance and also what RJ spoke about in terms of empathy and also the difference between a subject and a participant in many ways. Like, I try to follow this principle when I'm making a film where I'm not making a film about someone, I'm making a film with someone, right? And what does that mean? So if I'm starting an interview, it's not an interview, it's a conversation. And my first question is, do you have any questions for me? So you kind of create that proximity, or not create it, but really build a real genuine proximity with the participants of your story. Because I learned a long time ago, my parents are refugees from Vietnam, and I always was worried about them opening up trauma by hearing their story of their refugee journey. And it was until I made a short film about my family's history where they told me the full story. And then I asked them at the end of the interview, I was like, why didn't you tell me this? And they're like, you never asked. And so asking that question and, again, creating that relationship, that empathy with the people that you're making stories with is really important for me in the process.
I think being listened to is a really powerful thing. And I think that just as RJ and now Bao has made clear, there's like almost primal need for it. I'm curious, though, as the kind of receivers of these stories. Oftentimes I interview actors, and they'll say, after I wrapped that film, it stuck with me. I couldn't shed the character I played. I couldn't let her go. Do you find that projects, after you finish the edit and it's out in the world and your baby's off, going to do whatever it's going to do, does it stay with you in a kind of haunting way?
Yeah, in a way, that's kind of why we do it. It's this incredible privilege to float into somebody else's world, somebody else's life. The relationships are incredibly intense. They're built on trust, so they are, as I said, they are. They can get very intimate. You get to be a 17-year-old rock star for a year, and
Billie Eilish.
With Billie Eilish, and in a way, the haunting is that you also have to learn how to transition out. I mean, you were very wise to say to your subject, Monday's going to be a bummer. Everybody has that Monday after Sundance, and so you have to learn that. But, I always think of these films as a combination of what I witness, what we all witness when we're making it, and what what I experience. So it's a combination of what you see and how you yourself change, and in that way, the film becomes a record of that moment in your life as you were experiencing it. So, again, it stays with you, it resonates, it changes who you are, but I wouldn't use the word haunting unless it haunts you.
I saw Mary nodding as well.
Yeah, I think you hope that the experience of participating in the film ages well for the participants and for the people who supported and provided the experience, us, the filmmakers. And one of the most, we can control the circumstances under which we are making the film. We can create a supportive and ethical environment and circumstance and condition. The aspect that we can't control is how the audience responds to the film and ultimately engages with it. I have been pleasantly surprised by the generosity and compassion that has been shown to the participants in our documentaries. By and large, we all know that when millions of people watch your films, as you hope they do, there are going to be a few bad comments in the comment section. But one of the most gratifying experiences that I've had of late was a year after Quiet on Set premiered, Drake Bell, who shares so much in Quiet on Set, said on the occasion of the 1-year anniversary that he is still stopped in the airport by people who express compassion for him and say that his courage in speaking out has emboldened or provided comfort to them. And to know that he was saying that not 3 weeks after the film premiered or 3 months after the film premiered, but a year after, felt really good. And I'm very happy that he feels that way.
That's really wonderful. I'm curious, an interesting difference between journalism and documentary filmmaking is that in journalism, generally speaking, and we can argue about whether this is a worthy goal, but a goal of many journalists is what's called objectivity, being even-handed. I'm curious, documentary filmmaking is under no such historical ethical strictures, and I'm curious if you guys feel as though trying to be objective about your subjects is even a goal. Like, is that even something you're interested in?
No.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, me neither. No, at all.
I mean, I think it's important to distinguish between objective and having a point of view.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Thanks. If you could draw that out.
And I think it's perfectly permissible to have a point of view, and in a weird way, you can still be objective and have a point of view. I mean, ultimately, truth is our guardian. We're the guardians of truth in what we do, and so as long as we're transparent and honest, and within the kind of direction of our point of view is leading us, I think we're just as robust a storytelling form as journalism. And we could have a masterclass in this session about whether there's anything in journalism that's any more truly objective than what we do as filmmakers. So I think it's just being clear and transparent about what the film's point of view is.
We don't have perhaps the same obligation to objectivity, but we do have the same obligation to truth and truthfulness, and that's what we share with journalists. And that's a fundamental kind of defining aspect of the work we do. Also, we're artists. We're constructing narrative art out of real life, and in that way, we're not a whole lot different than Bradley Cooper making a film about Leonard Bernstein. Or a film about J. Robert Oppenheimer. Mm-hmm. These are very similar things. Again, the obligation is to be truthful.
And I'm generally suspicious of words like objectivity because, we think about, our shared cultural history. At one point, it was objective. The objective truth was that people could be slaves. There was an objective truth that women couldn't have credit cards. So this whole idea of what is objective, I'm always kind of suspicious of it because it's, it's
the pro credit card lobby is
I love credit cards.
Speaking out.
Credit cards. Good point. But for me, it's and also my this is my second documentary. My first documentary is Peer Kids, about homeless LGBT youth. Thank you. On Christopher Street, right around the corner in one of West Village. So, for me as a black gay man, subjectivity has been the goal, has been the North Star. It has been, no one has told my story before. No one has given people like me the microphone or the camera to say it. So I'm less concerned with trying to, mold myself into some sort of like nebulous objective truth rather than kind of asserting, who I am and who I represent and who's in the world with me, and that we are here and this is how we see the world, and it's not like how you see the world, and that's okay.
Yeah, I have to echo Elegance on that one. I do feel that in the same way he's suspicious of objectivity, truth to me is also a very triggering word, in the sense that the minute you've walked in with a camera, truth is altered and skewed, and we have to be like, that's the conversation to me, right? And being really hyper aware of how that's skewed, and I think that that's a responsibility. I think trying to put documentary in the box of journalistic rules is very dangerous. We're very, very different, and I think it ultimately hurts the genre and what we're trying to accomplish. I go back to something like Unveiled, right? And we spoke to 5 generations of survivors, and the church had 5 generations and an entire media entity to tell their truth, and these women had not. So did I care if I talked to them? I really didn't. So
Yeah.
My commitment is to accuracy. That is my guiding principle and North Star. And if you look at some of our recent work, if you look at The Fall of Diddy, if you look at Quiet on Set, those are both stories. In the first case, it concerns Diddy, of course, that are swarmed by conspiracy, if you will. So I think there's a real public service, and I don't mean that in a dutiful sense. It can be compelling and it can engage an audience in the millions. But there's a public service to provide in separating fact from fiction and making sure that you're not airing accounts that aren't true.
I think for me, for the longest time, this veil of objectivity has denied so many marginalized, underrepresented communities, artists, to be able to tell stories. For the longest time, my first film was about Saturday Night Live, and I felt like as an Asian American filmmaker, I can only tell Asian American stories for the longest time, and that someone had to come from an objective perspective to be able to tell these stories. But over time, I think, seeing the work of so many different filmmakers from all different, communities has empowered me to feel that as long as the POV is so important, and our personal perspective is so important, and our artistry is so important, that's what makes me able to tell these stories rather than think, okay, because I have personal stakes in it or a personal connection, I can't make a good film.
I think it was more or less the first thing that you said, Bao, which was, it's not about truth, it's about honesty, because truth, this is a philosophy 101 lecture. I'm not going to be like, what is truth? But the fact of the matter is that, just as everyone has said so elegantly, truth's a big word, and it's not necessarily findable because it means something different to everyone. But being honest about one's own perspective could be really valuable.
Yeah, I think, there's journalists in this room, there's filmmakers. For me, as a filmmaker that didn't have sort of this study of the rigor of journalistic standards, I'm always seeking the emotional truth in my films, right? That's the most important thing. And I happened to make a film, The Stringer, that was following a team of journalists who are following the factual truth. But I think that sort of balance between, saying the word balance in a room full of journalists is always scary for me.
Not like fair and balanced.
Finding a harmony in a way is really important for me. But at the end of the day, I think the emotion, the feeling is what I'm trying to get from my films.
I'm curious, starting out on any project is necessarily a big leap of faith. You don't know if you're going to find the right participants, the ones who can help you tell your story, the narrative through line. What does it feel like when you have that day where on the day you're like, okay, I had the idea, but now I see the film. Now I have my opening sequence. Now I have my closing sequence. Now I have the through line. What does it feel like when it clicks like that?
When does that happen?
Well, hopefully sometime.
I don't know. Guys, anybody?
Yeah, I mean, they always say, like, if you make the film that you set out to make, you're doing something wrong. You know, I mean, if you're not discovering something in the process of making the film that's unexpected and that's surprising you and moving the film in a new direction, you're probably not making a great film.
Yeah, when I started, every film I've ever made, I've started out certain of what it is, and especially with a doc. And then as soon as you sit down and you talk to someone, you realize, oh, I had it all wrong, and you start from zero. So I don't know, it really doesn't click in for me until the audience sees it. And the thing that I'm anticipating they do to it, they do, and I'm like, oh, whew, okay, you know. But I don't know. It's the emotional truth, and that's it's like playing a Ouija board in a way. Like, you get very, very warm, and then sometimes you're not sure, and sometimes I need the audience to tell me that it's all come together. So I don't know. I don't even necessarily believe that any film I've ever done I feel totally finished with. I always feel like I could go back and do something else and add this thing or ask this question that I should have asked, you know? So
films are never finished, they're always abandoned.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I do. I share the set of experiences and feelings that everyone's expressing, but there are moments where you don't know that you have the film, but when you're listening to someone in the middle of an interview and there's grace in the room and you are transported and know with absolute certainty that there is something distinct and special that will move others in the way that it is moving you. And it's just going to be a piece of the whole.
Mary and I both early career experiences were with the great filmmaker D.A. Pennebaker and his wife Chris Hedges. And the day I met Penny, he said to me, if you're going to make documentary films, you got to have a bank robber's mentality. You got to travel light and always be ready to make a run for it. And I think that's what the experience is like. It's, you know, you're on a heist and you do your best and you run out of town before anyone notices.
All right, now that we've evoked D.A. Pennebaker, I've been curious, did any of you have an experience either growing up or in school where you saw a great documentary and you thought to yourself, I didn't know people could do that. Maybe this is something I could be involved with?
Paris is Burning.
Oh, well, there you go.
Times of Harvey Milk for me.
That film blew my mind. Yeah, it still blows my mind. I love Paris is Burning. I saw that movie, and I was like, wait, what kind of movie is this? And then I read everything about it, and I'm like, oh, this is a documentary. And then I started watching. I saw Grey Gardens soon after that, and that was another one that kind of stuck in my soul. Yeah.
You said The Times of Harvey Milk.
Times of Harvey Milk.
Yeah.
I love RJ's film, The War Room.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I saw Harlan County, USA when I was 17. And Barbara, off camera, you would hear Barbara Koppel's kind of little voice asking these questions in the middle of what was essentially a war zone, you know. And I was like, "What's that? Who's that doing that?" And it stuck with me for a long time.
It's
forever.
not remotely a war zone, although maybe it felt like that way to you. But I remember your own voice speaking to Martha and speaking to Anna Wintour, and I'm seeing a commonality. I was like, who's that asking Anna how she's putting together the September issue?
For me, Hoop Dreams is always this opera of the intimate and the epic, and seeing how you can create something so civilizational but proximate at the same time. And, RJ's September issue for me in many ways of thinking you're going to watch a film about Anna Wintour, but then Grace Coddington becomes the heart of the story. And I'm always looking for my Grace in my films nowadays. So thanks to RJ for that.
Thank you. If I can, we showed a couple of these films at the Paris Theater over the last couple nights, and I had you talk about post-filmmaking experience. I had the great good fortune of sitting and watching it with Grace, who is still every bit as angry at Anna for cutting pictures. Right? That conversation never happened. He's lying. It was great. It was so great. So there you go.
Fantastic. All right, now that we've talked about some classic docs, I'm curious, in the time you guys have worked in this industry, how have you seen the market change? How have you seen audience expectations? Okay, yeah, we only have 5 minutes, so
that's the next panel.
Try to get the Cliff's Notes version, or maybe we could just extend. But
this has been great. Thank you.
Diversity ended.
Yeah.
Ended, yeah.
I didn't know it started, but
what little
it's over
was,
now.
yeah.
So, oh well.
Someone said to me that if you're not making money at what you're doing, it's just a hobby. And I'm realizing that it's a hobby at this point, which is a tough pill to swallow. I mean, it's just, I mean, we're scrappy. It's just like, we're so scrappy. Like, and I think we'll be fine, and we'll morph, and we'll figure it out. But I don't know what it holds. Like, you know, it's the old model. I had a film at Sundance and then Tribeca, and we're still trying to find homes for them, and that's just and that's the reality now. And when we do find homes for them, it's not going to be what we made them for. So I think that trying to reinvent ourselves once again, going back to our roots, going back to, you know, the way we used to raise money before, doing commercial projects to support our passion projects, all the things that we thought we were moving on from. I think we're going to start there and figure it out. I'm hopeful.
You know, I think that there's no room for work that's political in nature right now. And I don't even mean work that has a strong point of view about politics. I mean work that concerns the world of politics in the broadest sense. I think that's an undeniable reality at the moment that we're all in the midst of. Nonetheless, I do think maybe that's not the right transition nonetheless, but at the same time, there is great work being made, and there are great programmers and partners out there who are taking risks, and I think everyone on this panel is making incredible work, and I feel lucky that we're able to do so.
Yeah, cheers to that. What I feel right now is fear from the distributors, and that's hard to say, let alone to hear. But there's just this incredible fear that has blanketed the industry and made getting work out that matters harder than ever. And I'm lucky. I'm one of the lucky ones. Our film does says something about the political power structure, and has Paramount Plus to thank to get it out in the world. But there are many more films. I'm sitting next to filmmakers who have tremendous work that is still waiting distribution, and I'm angry. I'm really angry that the political climate and the social and political pressures are impacting the industry in a way that is making it harder to see good work and work that matters. And I'm going to stop there before I say something I regret.
But I think the audience interest is there. I think that whatever we may think about the ways in which people's appetites for the news may have shifted over the past year, I think people are hungry for great, well-told stories about the world in which we live. And it's a shame that audience interest isn't being met with commensurate kind of courage and curiosity on the distributor side.
Well, it's kind of like, I guess, this most recent golden age of documentary. You kind of had, when I was coming up, a documentary, you'd find there'd be like these diamonds in the rough, and you'd find them, and it'd be so amazing and so different from everything else you've seen. And then kind of at this like golden age, quote unquote, it just becomes all this content. It's just content. It's just something that you put on while you chop carrots for your stew, And as a result, now that that's over, it's like you realize that maybe some of these people who were like driving the business to these new heights, movies selling for $15 million out of Sundance and that kind of thing, that they never found documentary to be special to begin with. They were only interested in content, and it just so happened at that moment the content that they were met with was political in nature, and they've discovered that the content that people leave on in the background is not.
We do. I feel like everybody's speaking to this point that we're kind of outsiders to the entertainment industry. We come at it from a a side angle, and it requires scrappiness. And it requires Pennebaker's, edict of bank robbers mentality, and we've got to, it's smoke and mirrors. We all talked about the film we imagine before we start making it, but there's no script. We have no idea what's going to happen. We also talk about the fact that we rely on surprises to make the films that we love the most. So this is who we are. We chose this, and the art form is excelling. It's extraordinary what's going on in the art form. So the distributors, I'm an optimist. My wife always is like, "You're such an optimist." And a little bit because I think that the bubble, the boom, gave the wrong impression. Right. If you go back, I have to say, we couldn't sell The War Room. October Films, the scrappy little company, months later showed up and gave us nothing. And we couldn't sell the September issue. And months later, we went to Sundance and we left without a deal. And months later, the scrappy little company, Roadside Attractions, came along. And so we've been through this in the past. And I think that, people are going to learn how to monetize a smaller platform that I think that specializes in independent film. Look at what Mubi's doing. It's starting. It's tough. It doesn't mean it isn't tough. Believe me, because now there are so many more people who were working in the business, right? Yeah. And that's a tough moment with people who are looking for work. But it's going to come around, and there's lots of good to embrace. So much beautiful work to be excited about.
Unfortunately, we are at time. But so that optimistic note is going to have to be the last word. I'd like to thank all of our panelists and you for listening so attentively. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.